500 acres. That was the offer, laid out on the mahogany table between them like a royal flush in a game of five-card stud. The paper was crisp, the ink black and decisive. It was more land than Jedediah Stone had ever seen in one place, let alone imagined owning. Prime bottomland, too, with a creek running through it, green and lush even in the biting heat of the Nevada summer of 1878. All of it could be his. For one night's work. The woman who made the offer sat opposite him, her posture as straight and unyielding as the chair she occupied. Her name was Mrs. Lynn Suine, and in the 3 years since her husband's death, she had become something of a local legend in the dusty town of Redemption. A ghost in a house too big for one person, a puzzle the townspeople couldn't solve. They knew she was wealthy, the sole inheritor of her husband's considerable fortune from his dealings with the railroad. They knew she was Chinese, a fact that kept her at a permanent, polite distance from the town's society. And they knew she was a widow, a status that made her both vulnerable and, in the eyes of territorial law, unusually independent. Today, she wore a dress the color of a deep forest shadow, a dark green silk that seemed to drink the light in the dim parlor. It was not the calico or gingham of the other women in town. It was seamless and elegant, buttoned high on her neck, its quiet richness a statement of its own. Her black hair was coiled in an intricate knot, and her face, fine-boned and serious, gave away nothing. "The annual Founders' Day ball is on Saturday," she said, her voice low and even, carrying only the faintest trace of an accent. "I require an escort. A husband." Jedediah shifted in his seat. The polished wood felt slick beneath his worn denim trousers. He was a man more accustomed to a saddle than a parlor chair. His hands, calloused and sun-browned, rested on his knees, looking rough and out of place against the fine fabric. He was a cowboy, nothing more. He drifted into Redemption a month ago looking for work and found little, save for a few days mending fences on the edge of town. He was honest, he was strong, and he was nearly broke. He began, his voice raspy with disuse. I'm not the kind of man who goes to balls. And I am certainly no one's husband." "I am not looking for a husband," she clarified, a flicker of something sharp in her dark eyes. "I am looking for a man to play my husband for approximately 4 hours. You will accompany me to the town hall. You will dance with me twice. You will fetch me punch. When men approach, you will stand beside me and look proprietary. At the end of the evening, you will escort me home. Then you will leave, and this deed," she tapped the paper on the table, "will be filed with the territorial clerk in your name on Monday morning." The simplicity of it was confounding. It was too much for too little. "Why?" Jedediah asked, the word blunt in the quiet room. "Why me? You are new to town. Therefore, you have no established allegiances. You are large enough to be noticed." He was over 6 feet, broad in the shoulder. "And I am told you do not drink to excess. Most importantly, you need the money, or in this case, the land. It makes the arrangement clean." He understood the unspoken part. A lone woman, especially a Chinese woman of means, was a target. Men like Bartholomew Sterling, the town's unofficial patriarch who owned the bank, the general store, and half the county's debt, would circle. They would see her solitude as weakness, an opportunity. An invented husband, even a temporary one, was a shield. It was a strange, desperate kind of logic, but it was the logic of the frontier. 500 acres. It was a chance to stop drifting. A chance to build something that would last. A chance to have a place to call his own. The risk seemed small, the reward immense. He could swallow his pride for one night. "All right," he said, his gaze fixed on the deed. "You have a deal." A small, almost imperceptible sigh of relief escaped her. It was the first sign of vulnerability he had seen. She extended a delicate hand across the table. "Thank you, mister. I'm sorry, I did not ask for your name." He took her hand. Her skin was cool and smooth against his rough palm. The contact was brief, formal, but it sent a strange jolt through him. "It's Stone," he said. Jedediah Stone. Her reaction was immediate and startling. All the color drained from her face, leaving it the color of old porcelain. Her hand, which had been resting in his, went rigid, then pulled back as if she'd been burned. Her eyes, moments before calm and controlled, were now wide with an emotion he couldn't name. It wasn't just surprise. It was a deep, chilling shock, a kind of horrified recognition that made the air in the room go cold. She froze, her lips parted slightly, the name hanging between them like a death sentence. Jedediah stood, a knot of confusion and alarm tightening in his gut. "Mrs. Lynn? Are you all right?" She didn't answer. She simply stared at him, her carefully constructed composure shattered. The simple business transaction had just become something else entirely. He was no longer just a hired cowboy. He was Jedediah Stone, and for some reason, that name meant everything. Mrs. Lynn struggled to regain her composure, pressing a hand to her chest as if to still a frantic heartbeat. The silence in the parlor stretched, thick with unspoken questions. Jedediah remained standing, feeling large and clumsy in the delicate space. He could see the faint tremor in her hands. "Is it the name?" he asked quietly. "Did I know my father? Or—" "Please," she whispered, cutting him off. She took a slow, deliberate breath, and when she looked at him again, the mask of control was mostly back in place, though her eyes remained shadowed. "The deal stands, Mr. Stone. Please be here at 7 o'clock on Saturday evening. There will be a suit of clothes for you. My late husband's. I believe they will fit." She rose, a clear dismissal. The conversation was over. But as Jedediah let himself out of the grand, empty house and stepped back into the glare of the afternoon sun, the woman's reaction gnawed at him. He had been hired for his anonymity, yet his very name had struck her like a physical blow. He spat the dust from his mouth and squinted at the horizon. 500 acres was a fortune, but he had a cold feeling that the price for it was going to be far higher than a single evening of polite pretense. The next 2 days passed in a haze of anticipation and unease. Jedediah found it hard to concentrate on the odd jobs he'd picked up, his mind constantly returning to the strange, frightened look in Mrs. Lynn's eyes. He saw her once, from a distance. She was leaving the telegraph office, moving with that same contained grace, her green dress a slash of color against the town's monotonous brown dust. She did not see him. On Saturday evening, precisely at 7, he knocked on her front door. He had washed in the creek, shaved with his last sliver of soap, and combed his hair until his scalp hurt. The door was opened not by Mrs. Lynn, but by an older Chinese man who gave a slight bow and led him wordlessly to a guest room. Laid out on the bed was a black wool suit, a starched white shirt, and a silk tie. The clothes were of a quality Jedediah had never touched, let alone worn. They smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. As she predicted, they fit him well enough, the shoulders of the jacket a little snug, the trousers a fraction short, but the overall effect was transformative. Looking in the mirror, he saw not a drifter, but a man of substance. A stranger. When he entered the parlor, Mrs. Lynn was waiting. She had changed into a different dress, this one a deep, lustrous blue, the color of twilight. A simple string of pearls was her only adornment. She looked at him, her eyes traveling the length of him, and for a moment, her expression softened. "It suits you," she said. Her voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil he'd witnessed 2 days prior. "It feels like I'm in costume," he admitted. "We both are, Mr. Stone." She handed him a small, velvet-covered box. Inside was a plain gold band. "My husband's wedding ring. It is for your left hand." He slid it onto his finger. It felt heavy, foreign. "You think of everything, "I have had to," she replied, and he heard the weariness beneath the words. Their journey to the town hall was a short walk, but it felt a mile long. Heads turned as they passed. Whispers followed them like stirred-up dust. The sight of the reclusive widow on the arm of a strange man dressed in finery was the most interesting thing to happen in Redemption all summer. Jedediah felt the weight of their stares. He kept his head high, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, just as they'd agreed. He could feel the tension in her frame, as rigid as a bowstring. The town hall was ablaze with lanterns, the sound of fiddle music and laughter spilling out into the night. Inside, the heat was stifling, thick with the scent of perfume, sweat, and sawdust. And then he saw him. Bartholomew Sterling. He was holding court near the punch bowl, a man built of soft living and hard money. His eyes found them the moment they stepped through the door, and a slow, unpleasant smile spread across his face. Sterling made his way toward them, parting the crowd like a ship's prow. He stopped directly in front of them, his gaze dismissing Jedediah entirely as he addressed Mrs. Lynn. "Well, well, Sueen," he said, his voice oozing a false cordiality. "I must say, I am surprised to see you out." And with company he finally deigned to look at Jedediah, his eyes flicking over the borrowed suit with contempt. "Found yourself some temporary protection, have you?" The insult was plain, meant to humiliate her by framing Jedediah as nothing more than a hired guard dog, a common laborer dressed up for a night. The crowd around them fell quiet, waiting. Jedediah felt Mrs. Lynn flinch beside him. He saw the flicker of fear in her eyes before it was quickly masked. This was the test. This was the performance he was being paid for. But as he looked at Sterling's smug face, something inside him shifted. It was no longer just a performance. He thought of this quiet, proud woman, forced to buy a shield for herself in a town that should have offered her safety. Jedediah didn't raise his voice. He didn't puff out his chest. He simply met Sterling's condescending gaze and held it. He took a small step, placing himself slightly in front of Mrs. Lynn. "I'd watch my tone when speaking to my wife, Mr. Sterling," he said. The words were quiet, but they cut through the room's chatter like a razor. His voice was flat, without threat, but filled with an unshakable certainty that was more intimidating than any shout. Sterling's smile faltered. He had expected a hired hand to shuffle his feet and look at the floor. He had not expected this calm, direct challenge. He looked from Jedediah's implacable face to Mrs. Lynn's, who was now watching Jedediah with a look of stunned surprise. The power dynamic had shifted, and everyone in the room felt it. "Your wife?" Sterling scoffed, trying to recover. "You heard the man," Jedediah said, his gaze unwavering. "Now, if you'll excuse us, she promised me a dance." Without waiting for a reply, he gently took Mrs. Lynn's arm and led her toward the dance floor, leaving Sterling standing flat-footed, his face a mask of thwarted arrogance. The fiddle music swelled to fill the silence, and Jedediah pulled her into the gentle rhythm of a waltz. He was not a graceful dancer, but he was steady. For the first time all evening, he felt the tension leave her body. She leaned into his lead, her hand resting on his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the music. "It's what a husband would do," he replied simply. But as they circled the floor under the curious eyes of the entire town, he knew he had done more than play a part. He had chosen a side. After the dance, as he fetched her a glass of punch, he saw Sterling in a corner, speaking in low, urgent tones to the territorial marshal. The confrontation was not over. It had only just begun. Later that night, as they walked home under a canopy of brilliant stars, the air had cooled. The silence between them was different now, less a void and more a shared space. Back at her house, the older manservant took her wrap. She turned to Jedediah in the foyer, the lamplight casting soft shadows on her face. "The name Stone has brought trouble to this valley before," she said, her voice heavy. "I pray it does not do so again." The cryptic remark landed with the weight of a stone, deepening the chasm of mystery that lay between them. He was beginning to understand that he had not been hired to protect her from gossip, but from a danger that had roots deep in the past, a past that was somehow tied to his own name. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 11 times, each stroke echoing in the cavernous silence of the house. The performance was over. According to their agreement, he was supposed to leave. The 500 acres were his. But he couldn't go. Not yet. "Mrs. Lynn," Jedediah said, his voice low. "Sueen. You have to tell me. What is it about my name? What trouble did it bring here before?" She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the polished floorboards. He saw the conflict in her, the lifetime of caution warring with a new, fragile trust. Finally, she gave a slight nod. "Come," she said, leading him not into the formal parlor, but into a smaller, more personal sitting room. A fire was dying in the hearth, and the room was filled with books and scrolls, a world away from the dusty streets of redemption. She walked to a small, lacquered chest on the mantelpiece and unlocked it with a tiny brass key she wore on a chain around her neck. From it, she removed 2 items, a daguerreotype in a tarnished silver frame and a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. She handed them to him. He took the photograph first. It showed a young Chinese man with intelligent, kind eyes and a gentle smile. He wore American clothes, but his face held a scholarly sensitivity. "My husband," she said softly. "Lin Bao." Jedediah looked from the photograph to her face, seeing a ghost of the same strength and quiet dignity. Then he untied the ribbon and unfolded the top letter. The English script was elegant, but the paper was worn and creased, as if it had been read 100 times. It was a letter from her husband to his brother back in China, dated 6 years earlier. He read, his lips moving silently. The letter spoke of hope, of building a new life. It spoke of a freight business he had started, a partnership with an American man he trusted, a man who knew the territory. Together, they had pooled their life savings, every penny, to purchase wagons and mules. They were on the cusp of success. Then, the letter's tone changed. The partner had vanished. One night, he was simply gone, along with the wagons, the mules, and the lockbox containing all their capital. He had taken everything, leaving Bao with nothing but debt and betrayal. The shock and the shame, the letter explained, had broken something inside him. A sickness took hold of his lungs, a sickness from which he never recovered. Jedediah's blood ran cold as he read the final lines of the paragraph. "My partner, my friend whom I trusted as a brother, has ruined me. I will carry the dishonor of his actions to my grave. I pray that you never have the misfortune to cross paths with the man who did this to me. His name is Robert Stone." The letter trembled in Jedediah's hand. Robert Stone. His father. The room was utterly still. He could hear the faint hiss of the embers in the fireplace. He looked up at Suine, his face pale. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Her shock at his name. The danger she spoke of. He was the son of the man who had destroyed her husband, the architect of the tragedy that had shaped her entire life. The borrowed salute felt like a shroud, the gold ring a brand of shame. "He was my father," Jedediah said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "He abandoned my mother and me when I was a boy. I never knew what became of him. Only that he was a drifter. And a thief." He placed the letter and the photograph carefully back on the table, as if they might burn him. He felt a profound, inherited shame, a debt that could never be repaid. He pulled the wedding band from his finger and set it beside the letters. "I can't do this," he said, his voice thick. "I cannot take your land. Not now. I release you from our deal. I'll leave town in the morning." He expected relief from her, or anger, or even satisfaction. Instead, he saw a deep, weary sadness in her eyes. She looked at the photo of her late husband, then back at Jedediah. She saw the honest anguish on his face, the shame he wore for a crime that was not his own. "Your father's deeds are not your own, Jedediah," she said, speaking his given name for the first time. It sounded different in her voice, softer. "He was a man who took. I have spent the last few hours in the company of his son. And I see a man who gives. A man who defends." She stepped closer, her gaze direct and unwavering. "Bartholomew Sterling does not know you are Robert Stone's son. But he was my husband's other creditor. He hounded Bao after your father disappeared. He has been trying to get his hands on this land ever since. He believes I am weak and alone. Tonight, you showed him I am not." Her resolve seemed to harden as she spoke. "The deal stands. You are my husband until this night is over. We will see this through. Together. Her grace was a staggering thing. She was offering him a path to redemption that he hadn't known he was seeking. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not just a wealthy widow, but a woman of immense strength, a woman who could look upon the son of her greatest enemy and see only the man himself. He slowly slid the gold ring back onto his finger. A sharp, insistent knock echoed from the front door, making them both jump. The sound was hard and official. They exchanged a look of dread. The manservant opened the door to reveal two figures on the porch, the territorial marshal, his face grim, and behind him, Bartholomew Sterling, his expression radiating smug triumph. "Mrs. Lynn," the marshal said, stepping inside. "Sorry to disturb you so late. Mr. Sterling has filed a claim. An urgent matter." Sterling pushed past him, holding a piece of paper aloft like a trophy. "This is a debt instrument, Marshal. Signed by the late Mr. Lynn. It makes me the beneficiary of a loan I made to his freight business. A substantial loan. With this house and all his lands held as collateral." He unfurled the document with a flourish. "The debt is long past due. I am here to claim what is legally mine." The marshal took the paper, his brow furrowed as he read it under the foyer lamp. This appears to be a legal claim. The signature looks authentic. Do you have anything to refute it?" The trap had been sprung. Sterling had waited, choosing his moment perfectly, turning the law itself into his weapon. Suine stood frozen, the color once again draining from her face. Everything she had fought to protect was about to be stripped away by a piece of paper, another ghost from her husband's disastrous past. The air in the foyer was thick with the scent of Sterling's victory. He looked from Suine's stricken face to Jedediah's, a sneer playing on his lips. "Your hired man can't help you now, Suine. This is a matter of law, not muscle." Jedediah ignored him. He stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the document in the marshal's hand. "Let me see that paper," he said, his voice dangerously calm. The marshal, a fair man named Abernathy, hesitated for a moment, then held it out. Jedediah took it, his gaze scanning the lines of text until he reached the bottom. He saw the name, Lin Bao, scrawled in a florid, looping script. And beside it, the witness signature. He stared at it, his memory casting back 20 years to a handful of crumpled letters his mother had kept in a Bible, letters from a father he barely knew. The looping R, the sharp, jagged teat in the last name. He had traced that signature with his finger as a boy, trying to feel some connection to the man who had written it. "This is a forgery," Jedediah said, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. He looked straight at Marshal Abernathy. "The signature for Lin Bao. I don't know what his hand looked like. But the witness signature. I know that one. I'd know it anywhere." He tapped the second name on the page. "That is my father's signature. Robert Stone." He then pointed to the first signature. "And if I had to guess, I'd say he wrote this one, too. My father wasn't just a thief. He was a forger." He lifted his gaze and pinned Sterling with it. "And he wasn't working alone." Sterling's confident smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of pure panic. He had built his case on a dead man's debt, never imagining that the ghost of his accomplice would walk into the room, wearing his victim's suit. "This is absurd," Sterling blustered. "The man is delirious. He's trying to protect her." "Am I?" Jedediah asked Abernathy, never taking his eyes off Sterling. "I have letters from my father. Not many, but enough. They're in my saddlebags at the livery. His signature is on every one. You bring them here, and you'll see. They will match the witness signature on this document perfectly. And I'll wager they match the other one, too." The marshal looked from Jedediah's unblinking certainty to Sterling's sudden, sweaty pallor. He was a man who understood the difference between righteous anger and guilty bluster. He had seen enough liars in his time to recognize one now. "Mr. Sterling," Abernathy said, his voice hardening. "You will wait here. I'm going to send my deputy for those letters." The fight went out of Sterling in an instant. His scheme, so carefully constructed, had crumbled to dust. The public humiliation, the legal consequences, it was all over. He knew what the letters would prove. 3 months later, the first chill of autumn was in the air, turning the leaves on the cottonwood trees by the creek to a brilliant gold. The scandal of Bartholomew Sterling's fraud and his hasty departure from redemption was already old news. The town, having witnessed the quiet dignity with which Jedediah and Suine had faced him, had slowly, grudgingly, begun to afford her a new kind of respect. The 500 acres were now officially Jedediah's. The deed, free and clear, was filed in the territorial office. He had spent the last few months working the land with a fervor he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't just mending fences, he was building a life. The land adjoined Suine's property, and there was no longer a clear boundary between them. Their lives, like their lands, had begun to merge. He was finishing a section of a new corral, the scent of fresh-cut pine sharp in the crisp air, when he saw her walking toward him from the house. She carried a tin cup of water in her hand. She no longer wore the severe, formal dresses. Today she was in a simple, practical skirt and blouse, her hair in a simple braid down her back. A small, genuine smile touched her lips as she approached. "You work too hard," she said, handing him the cup. "It's good work," he replied, his voice rough. He drank deeply, the cool water a balm on his dusty throat. He handed the cup back, and for a moment, his calloused fingers brushed against hers. The touch was warm, familiar. An easy silence settled between them, the kind that only comes with shared understanding. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out the folded deed. The paper was already softening at the creases from how often he'd taken it out to look at it. He held it, but his eyes were on her. "A name can carry the weight of the past," he said, his voice quiet but clear over the whisper of the wind. "But a man's hands decide what he builds in the present." Suine's smile widened, reaching her eyes. It transformed her face, wiping away the last shadows of the lonely widow and revealing the resilient woman beneath. The land hadn't been a payment for a night of pretense. It had been the foundation for a future neither of them could have ever imagined. It was a beginning, earned not by a contract, but by an act of courage and a moment of unexpected grace. And that brings us to the end of this one. If you stayed with me all the way through, thank you. Stories like this one only get told because folks like you sit down and listen. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you want more stories from the old frontier, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Until then, take care of yourself, and thanks again for being here.